All right, welcome to our 1309 kitchen. Today we're going to focus on making different types of soups. When we talk about soups in culinary world, we actually have two different classifications for those soups. We have what we consider a clear soup and a thick soup. So clear soups are going to be things like your broths. So you might see a chicken broth or a beef broth. In this case, we're going to actually go through and make a chicken and rice soup for today, and that'll be one of our clear soup for the day. And then we're gonna have our thick soups, which we can look at in a bunch of different ways, right? We can see them as purees, as creams, bisques, chowders, those soups that actually have a little bit more body to them, and it's not just the stock. So for today's demonstrations, we're gonna have Chef Dominguez helping us out with our soups, and Edgar's gonna help us out as well with our soup preparation as well. So they're helping me out in the background, and we're gonna go ahead and get started with our chicken and rice soup. All right, so first thing we want to do is make sure we have a nice hot pan. In this case, when we're making our soups or stocks or anything of that sort, we want to make sure that the pan is taller rather than wider. So as you can see, this pan is nice and tall, and it gives us room for that conduction cooking so that as the stock is cooking, it's gathering all the flavors of the chicken, the vegetables, the herbs that we're going to throw in here, and that's really important for us. So the first thing that I'm going to actually start off with is I'm going to start off with our veggies first, just to start getting. And you can see we got a smoke point from that oil because we left it on too hot, too long. When it starts on fire, that's the flash point of the oil. If you have something like butter that you're using, that's going to have a higher flash point and a higher smoke point. So we use things like olive oil to increase that flash and smoke point. Okay, so from here, these vegetables that we have in here are onion, carrot, and celery, and those three are what we call our mirepoix. So if you hear me say that throughout the course of our soups, you're going to see that that's really the basis of our soup, the base of the soup. If you catch up on our stock video, you'll also see that we use mirepoix in stock. So those three flavors are constantly being recycled and reused in our cooking methodologies. And we're going to get these nice and translucent, maybe a little bit past the translucency to soften them up. We really want the cooking process to occur with the stock and letting them release their flavors in there. I added a little bit of garlic to that. All right. And so we want the natural sugars that are found in the vegetables, like onions, have a good natural amount of sugar in them. And what we want to do is allow that sugar to start coming out. And it's going to start building up a little bit at the bottom of the pan, and that's all good. We want that to happen. So as you see the bottom of the pan turning brown, that's exactly what's occurring. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and stop it and render those vegetables on the side. And once you get to this point, you can definitely smell the vegetables coming together. Flavors are coming together. And the next step that I want to do, and I'm going to set these vegetables aside for us. So the next step that I'm going to want to do is cook off our chicken. And again, we want to get that caramelization underneath that chicken. It's going to build our flavors for our soup. I did not use the entire amount of oil, so I can have a little bit more to help us transfer the heat from the pan to the chicken. If I can get that on quick enough. Good, there we go. So we got our oil in there. Getting our chicken going. So we got our raw product done, and we're going to get rid of that pan quickly because we don't want to risk the sauce contamination. Thank you, Chef. Okay. And we also want to season a nice fair amount of salt and pepper. We want to season about every step of the way. All right, so you can see that we're getting some caramelization on the bottom of the pan again. This is very good for us. Exactly what we're looking for. And we're getting that chicken to cook out a little bit. So we're basically building the flavors at the bottom of the pan and just kind of taking it one step at a time, next layer, next layer, next layer. If you are of age, I would also suggest maybe if you wanted to take about 2 ounces of white wine at this point, you can hit it with a little bit of white wine right now. And that's gonna help us lift these flavors up off the bottom of the pan. And what I'm gonna do is pull the chicken now. And I'm pulling the chicken, it's probably about a quarter of the way done. I'm pulling that chicken back out because I don't want it to dry out. Worst thing that you can have in any dish is dried out chicken, right? And now we got our vegetables reworking back in there. We're gonna collect all of this, what we call our fond, the bits and pieces of caramelization. And we're gonna do that little by little. We're gonna throw a little bit of that stock in there, and this is what we call deglazing. To deglaze is to pour some liquid inside of our pan and collect all of that fond and goodness that's at the bottom of the pan there. All right, now that we've done that, we're gonna throw in our stock. And again, you can catch the stock video from us from our previous shots and videos. Once we get this cooking off, we're gonna go ahead and throw in, we did a little sachet with some thyme and some bay leaf, and we just tied it up together just like that. It's okay if the bay leaves come off and they fall into the soup, that's not a problem. And then we're gonna throw our rice in there. We're gonna allow all of this to cook. And kind of the beauty of this thing is kind of set it and forget it, right? If you wanted to set this up in your crock pot and go to the grocery shopping or just shopping, right? You could absolutely do that. So now that we've got that going, we're gonna move this one out of our way. This chicken is gonna get refrigerated until later use. Let's put those somewhere else for now. All right, so we'll stop there and then we'll start the next soup next. All right, we're gonna get started next on our bisque, our seafood bisque. And the thing that we really wanna keep in mind on the seafood bisque is that shells are good, okay? They're not good for serving to the guests, but they are really good for flavor. So what we're gonna do is go through and cut the meat out of these, chop them up. We have a little bit of cod, we have a little bit of shrimp, and we're gonna get this set up. But we're also gonna saute those shells in there. I'm gonna leave the shells on the shrimp. I'm gonna leave some of that shell in our soup. And that's going to, what we call it is fortify the stock. We also have a little bit of lobster stock already ready to roll. And we're gonna take this meat out because that's what we're gonna use. That's the good stuff, right? But we're gonna take these shells and we're gonna continue to use them as well. And that's basically what our lobster stock is. We're gonna take our vegetables, mirepoix, like we talked about earlier, onion, carrot, and celery, with our shells. And on the only difference is when we're making the stock, we'll grind the shells up. We'll run them through a meat processor, through a meat grinder, so that they release all the flavor that they have to offer. So that's what we'll do with those. And then the cod, we want to leave it like nice little 1-inch dice. So we call that a large dice. So you see you get some nice meaty chunks in there. All right, I'm gonna stop now, get everything set up for the next section. So we're gonna go ahead and get started with our lobster bisque. And again, we're gonna do a lot of the same that we did on the other one. But the difference is gonna be that we're gonna start out with our proteins on this one really quickly and give them a nice quick sear. Remember, sear is hot pan, cold oil, just like if we were doing a saute. And again, we're gonna start developing those flavors that we're looking for. I had that metal spoon there to remind everybody that I'm using a wooden spoon for a reason. I don't like using metal spoons. Metal on metal is gonna give the soup a little bit more of a metallic flavor. You might see a metallic color if you're doing a clear soup or a cream soup. So we kind of want to limit that as much as possible. sizzle plate. Okay, so right about there, we've got some coloration coming up at the bottom of the pan. We got our fish getting color, so we're gonna go ahead and pull that out now. Thank you. Okay, so we got that pulled out. We're gonna start with some vegetables, some shallots. Just remember that bisque is kind of a very high-end soup, if you will. I'm gonna hit it with some butter. So now we're getting the good stuff in there. Again, remember that butter has a very low smoke point, so it's going to release it's gonna melt down and it's gonna start smoking on you pretty quickly. So we can pull it off the heat or lower the heat, whatever you are more comfortable with, or both. And this is, like I said, a very fine soup, so at the end of the day, this one is gonna actually get pureed down a little bit. We won't have any chunks to it like we would in our chicken soup. We're sweating that out really nicely. I'm gonna go ahead and throw our lobster shells back in there. You can see those are sweating out now. They'll start turning bright pink from that brown orange color. They'll turn a little bit more red as they're cooking out. We'll raise our heat just a little bit. And as that's happening, what I'm gonna do next is actually start to create a roux. A roux is a thickening agent that is flour and fat. There are several types of thickening agents, so obviously we can do things like a slurry. The only drawback to a slurry on a soup is that it won't hold up very long. So if you make your soup and you're kind of walking away from it and doing other things, it will not hold up structurally as you might intend for it to do. So then the next step is we're gonna add our stock in here. This is a mixture of lobster and fish stock. So like we talked about seasoning every step of the way kind of thing, we do a very light seasoning, okay? Because what you're gonna notice on all of these soups is that as we let them reduce or cook out, they're gonna reduce the moisture content. So as it reduces that moisture content, whatever salt you put in there is staying in there. So if we tasted it and we said, okay, needs more salt now, and we let it cook for another 30, 45 minutes, and we come back to it, we're like, wait a minute, that's too salty now. So you're gonna have to re-water it back down, which kind of defeats the whole purpose of reducing it and letting it bring all of its flavors together. So you can see we got some nice coloration from that lobster. Whoa. From where it was that brown color, now we got that bright seafood color that we're looking for. Now, out in restaurants, sometimes they'll use different things. Instead of just traditional lobster, traditional shrimp, you might use something like rock shrimp that will hold up better for long times of being held up on heat. On lobster, you might see something like a slipper lobster meat, which will help hold up in the heat as well. So we're gonna let this go ahead and start reducing down for about another 30 minutes. In about 30 minutes, we'll hit it with our cream. We'll pull the lobster tails out and season it off with our spices and our sauce.
Hello, this is Chef Ana Dominguez, and we welcome you to our traditional soup making. All right, guys, now we're gonna do a cream of spinach soup. It's gonna be a little bit more rustic, not like your lobster. It's gonna be, because we're not even gonna use the blender, all right? So the first step that I'm gonna do, instead of having to use the blender, I am gonna blanch my spinach. Remember, blanching, all it means is you are gonna put your vegetables into boiling water with a little bit of salt. This is gonna brighten up the color of your vegetables. All right. Every vegetable, you're gonna blanch it for a different amount of time because this is spinach. really, you want to do it for just a quick, less than a minute, all right? Remember blanching your vegetables, you have to, immediately after they're done, you're gonna put them in an ice bath, water and ice, to chalk them. All right? We're gonna do this with all your spinach. After I have blanched and chalked all my spinach, we're gonna chop it up and we're gonna continue to do our cream. Talk a little bit more on the last one. All right, so I'm done blanching all my spinach. Now I'm just gonna give it a rough chop. Now remember, we just blanched this, so you do wanna try to squeeze all the water possible out. That way you just not very watery spinach. If this was for sauteing purposes or other thing that's not a soup, I would totally squeeze even more moisture out of this spinach, even in between paper towels. It's not the case, so I don't need to worry a lot about that. Now I'm gonna go ahead, I'm gonna give it a raw chop. All right, we already blanched our spinach. I did try to get some moisture out of there. Again, I'm not very concerned because it is a soup. If it was for other purposes like sauteing, I would definitely try to squeeze more of that water out. And I'm just gonna give it a raw chop. Again, I said this is gonna be a kind of a rustic cream of spinach. No blender needed, right? After I do this, we're gonna start cooking bacon. I was gonna use oil, but bacon makes everything better, right? And we can use off that fat from the bacon to sweat our shallots, and we can use the crispy bacon so we can garnish our soup at the end. All right, guys, we are doing our cream of spinach. First thing I'm gonna do, I'm gonna render this bacon. Right, remember we're using wooden spoons instead of metal spoons. That way we don't get a metally taste in our soup, right? The fat from the bacon, again, it's gonna help me sweat and cook my shallots and my garlic. And then the cooked bacon I'm gonna reserve to be my garnish at the end. So I'm gonna just let this bacon get crispy so I can render the fat and use all of that goodness. Fat is flavor. I do have a good amount of fat right now. I'm just gonna let the bacon get a little bit crispier just so I can use it as a garnish at the end for the soup. If a couple of pieces stay there, I'm not gonna be too worried about it. All right, I'm gonna pull it away from the fire. And I'm just pressing it, trying to save as much fat as I can in the pan. Because again, that's the fat that's gonna help me with my roux and my garlic and shallots. All right, so I have my hot oil already here. This to the side. And I'm gonna add my shallots. Whoop, and my garlic. And I'm just gonna stir it up to help it sweat in there. Now garlic does tends to cook and burn very easily, so be careful with that. Now Chef Guerra did talk about thickening agents such as roux he used for the bisque. Same thing, a roux, it's fat and flour. In this case, bacon fat, but it can be butter, it can be lard, it can be, he used butter, right? So I'm gonna add my flour into the pot. I'm gonna stir this up and I'm gonna cook it off. All right, you do have to stir it a little bit and cook it out because you want to cook out that flour taste. All right, nobody likes to eat raw flour. Now, the longer you cook your roux, the darker it's gonna get, and the darker the roux is, the less it's gonna thicken. So you don't want this to turn super brown, otherwise it's not gonna really thicken your soup. All right, couple of stirrs. This looks good and smells delicious. I'm gonna pull it a little bit out of the fire. I'm gonna add my stock. In this case, I believe it's chicken stock. Again, you want to add a little bit at the beginning. That way you can deglaze your pan from all that fat, drippings, and the roux. A little bit of stir. This was a little bit frozen, no problem. All right, I'm just gonna give it a stir. Help that roux get mixed with the chicken stock. All right, once this melts, once the stock is well combined with your roux, we're gonna add our heavy cream and we're gonna start to season it out. Remember, with soups, you don't want a heavy season from the beginning. You do wanna reserve a little bit of that seasoning because we're still gonna cook this out for about 15 minutes. So you don't wanna end up with a very salty soup. I am gonna add some nutmeg. All right, all of our stock has been added. We are not gonna incorporate our heavy cream. In there, we're gonna add our spinach, our chopped blanch spinach. Now we're gonna season it with a little bit of salt. Again, you don't wanna be super heavy on the salt. This is still gonna simmer for about 15 minutes to get all that good flavor of the spinach. So you don't wanna over salt it. We're gonna add some nutmeg. It is very strong too, so don't add too much. And as optional, you can add a little pinch of cayenne pepper. I do like spicy, and I think it's a very nice touch, so I am gonna add it. Gonna stir this up. Also, this recipe uses Parmesan cheese for goodness flavor. Parmesan cheese is very salty, so that's another reason why you wouldn't want to add a lot of salt before that simmering process that we're gonna do, because it's gonna add a good amount of saltiness in there. I'm gonna let this come to a simmer. Once it's simmering, we're gonna add little by little the Parmesan cheese so we can melt in here, and then we're just gonna simmer it for like 15 minutes, like I said. Remember, it's always better to have to adjust the seasoning at the very end once you're ready to serve, or once everything's ready, than having to add more water because it ended up being way too salty, or because it had way too much nutmeg. That's why you saw me only adding a few, like a couple of pinches, and then we'll get back once the soup is done. We'll correct the seasoning. And you do want to let it simmer before you add the cheese. Otherwise, it's not going to melt the cheese. You're just going to see cheese floating. No, not good. Also, you don't want to, when it's high amounts of cheese that you're adding, you don't want to dump it all in if it's a lot, because it's going to just clump up and it's not going to be easy for the cheese to melt in and give your soup that velvety feeling, okay? So this looks like it's getting hot. It's simmering. All right, now that it's simmering, we're just gonna add the cheese. And like I said, I'm not gonna dump it all in. I'm gonna sprinkle probably half of that, and I'm gonna start stirring. This is another good reason for us to be using a wooden spoon. That way, because I am stirring it kind of vigorously, you don't want to scrape the sides of the pan and create that metallic flavor. If you have maybe a whisk that it's coated with silicone, that'll be very good too. All right, I'm gonna add some part of my cheese. All right, so now I'm just gonna let this simmer for 15 minutes. And we'll come back to correct the seasoning. All right, now what we're gonna do is a roasted tomato soup. Very easy peasy. We're gonna start off hot pan, cold oil. We're gonna sweat our mirepoix. Again, mirepoix, it's 50% onions, 25% carrots, 25% celery. And we're gonna cook them up until they are starting to brown, right? Again, using a wooden spoon, better. And we're just gonna sweat them. We actually want a little bit of color in here, okay? If you want to, you can season a little bit. Season at all times, but again, you don't want to be too harsh on there. For this soup, we are gonna blend half of it right before we finish, and we are gonna add a little bit of heavy cream to add some richness until the soup is a little bit more velvety, but still wanting that rustic feel where you still have some chunks of the vegetables. I'm gonna stop moving it so much. That way the vegetables can actually get color. Really want to get a nice color on them, some caramelization, because all that is going to translate into flavor. Especially in the soup that it's a roasted tomato soup, you really want that. We actually already got our tomatoes that are already roasted. That's why you see some black specks in there. If you have fresh tomatoes, what you can do is concasse them. That means peeling them, chucking them into hot water and then cold water so you can remove the peel. Or you can just, like Mexicans like to do it. I'm Mexican, so I'm very used to do that. You just put them in the grill, or you put them in the comal, just so they can blacken a little bit, and then you can chop them. Though if you do that, do mind that you're gonna get the skin on, which for some people it's a little bit unpleasant. So if you don't want that, again, concasse them so you can take the peel off. And then okay, we're going. We have some color in there. Now what we're gonna do, again, that's if you don't have your tomatoes already roasted. I do have them already roasted. I am gonna go ahead and add some garlic. I'm actually gonna add a little bit of butter. Just for them not to stick in there. All right, now I'm gonna add tomato paste. Just like if we were doing, if you remember, or if you haven't seen our videos on stock, you should refrain to this. You're gonna stir this up with the tomato. I'm gonna go back to the fire. And you see all that black that looks in the pan? That's actually flavor that we want. But now, in this case, if it was just a stock or another soup, we would just go ahead and add deglaze the pan with stock. In this case, I do want to create a little bit of a thickening agent, so I'm gonna add my flour, and that's the reason why I added some butter right now, right before the tomato paste. I needed some fat for this to happen. You're gonna stir it up. All right, again, you want to stir it for a little bit. That way you cook off that flour taste. It is our thickening agent, but you don't want to taste that it's there. You want it for its purpose, not the flavor. All right, now I'm gonna just pull it a little bit out of the fire, and we're gonna start deglazing our pan with the stock a little bit to start off with. That way you get a chance to really scrape the bottom of that pan. All right. Now the rest of our stock. I'm gonna stir it up. Now we're gonna go ahead and add our roasted tomatoes. Again, I have them already roast them, and they have a rough chop or small dice. I am gonna add a pinch of sugar. This is especially in case, I believe one of our students actually roasted these tomatoes, but if you are using a can of roasted tomatoes, adding some sugar will help a little bit to cut out that metal taste from the can. So you do want to add a little bit. All right, now this is gonna simmer for a little bit. Once it has simmered, we're gonna blend half of the soup, and we're gonna return it back to the pan, and then we're gonna finish it off with some heavy cream. All right, our soup has been simmering for about 20 minutes. Doesn't need a lot. And now what we're gonna do is we are gonna blend half of the soup, and we're gonna finish it up with some heavy cream and correct the seasoning. You could possibly, if you want to, have a more fine soup or a more chic soup. You could puree all of it. I am not gonna do that just because I like to have still some texture in there from the tomatoes and the vegetables that we cooked up from mirepoix, carrots, onions, and celery. So I'm gonna blend this. Mind, this is very hot, so you do have to have some form for the steam to go off. If you can, start it on low. That way your blender doesn't explode. It will happen. So in this case, if I put the cover that comes in here, it's gonna blow off. So I'm just gonna cover it with a clean towel, okay? All right. See what I'm saying? Now all we're gonna do is we're gonna transfer back our blended soup. All right, and this is what I'm talking about. Even though it's blended, you're still gonna, because there's part that we didn't blend, you're still gonna see some good texture in there. Now, all that we're gonna do is finish it up with some heavy cream. And adjust the seasoning. Again, you don't have to simmer more than this. It has already a nice thickness. The heavy cream added a little bit more of a body. So because I am happy and fine with the texture that and the thickness that my soup has right now, I am gonna go ahead and do the final seasoning, which I did taste it, and it does need a little bit of salt. So I'm just gonna correct the seasoning by adding some salt, some pepper, and that's it. This is roasted tomato soup. All right, we are back to our cream of spinach soup. It's been simmering for 20 minutes. That way it gets the good flavor from the spinach. If you are happy with the thickness and the texture that your soup has at this point, just do the final seasoning. You can also blend the soup at this point. I am not gonna do it, I like it like this, so I'm just gonna finish off the seasoning. If you find that your soup it's a little bit thin, you want it a little bit thicker, what you can totally do is make in a separate pan, you can make a little bit more roux, that is a fat and some flour, cook it off a little bit, add some of the soup, that way you thicken that soup and then return it back to the pan. All right, I think my soup has a good thickness, so all I'm gonna do is I'm gonna adjust the seasoning. gonna add a little bit more of nutmeg, salt, pepper, nutmeg, a pinch of cayenne, and that's it. We're gonna serve it along with the crispy bacon that we have from to start off the way we started this one, right? And that's it for this one, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in to our EPCC Culinary Arts.
All right, now we're gonna turn our attention back to our bisque. Again, remember this is a really nice soup that we're looking for. Basically what we made is a fish velouté here by adding the roux and the stock. It's not gonna be white like a traditional velouté would be because of the coloration that we're getting from those lobster tails. So the first thing that we actually wanna do is remove our lobster tails. And I've gotten a little strainer here because I wanna take out all of the vegetables and everything that we've put in there in our soup. And I'm actually pouring it into a pan that has some warm cream in it. We always wanna keep the cream warm when we're adding it to a hot liquid. Otherwise it can break and make for a very, very yucky soup that will not be very attractive to our customers or our guests at the end of the day. So you can see some bits and pieces of the shell actually broke off while they were in cooking process. So you see those bright colors there. So we want to make sure that we strain all of that out. We don't want to give that to our guests or our friends or family, whoever we're cooking for, and have them choke on it or break a tooth or something like that. Okay? And then the very next step that we're going to do is actually make sure that we get all this out, okay? Very important not to push down into this. If we push down into this, what we're doing is we're basically taking all those shallots and everything and mushing them up and putting it in there. That's not good for our overall texture, okay? So we want to avoid that. We're just going to tap the top of our strainer in this case and allow it to go through. If you have a sieve or a chinois or something else like that, you can use that as well. But we don't want to push the product through again, okay? We're just going to lightly tap it out. And again, make sure your shells are faced down so that the liquid comes out. And again, you can see in our final product with that cream, it's going to be some nice, delicious, creamy bisque. That's very important for our bisque. Any thick soup that we make, what we're looking for is a consistency of slightly thicker than cold cream. So I actually just had some cold cream, and that's kind of our consistency that we're looking at for the cold cream. So we want to make sure that our actual soup ends up a little bit thicker than that by allowing it to reduce. And making sure we get all the good stuff out of here. And again, there we go. And you can use spoon, tong, whatever you want. You can use your hand. Just tap the side of it. Don't push anything through. That's no good for us, okay? Set that aside now. And then we're going to finish off our bisque here. As soon as we bring this back up to a boil, we're going to allow our fish to cook out. Again, seasoning every step of the way. We just added cream. Go with a little bit of black pepper there. All right. And as we're getting that up to a boil, again, gently. You want to do this kind of gently. You don't want to put your cream on high heat immediately. Otherwise, it'll separate and break on you. You can fix it if your soup does break on you. Just take some cold cream, pull it off the heat, hit it with a little bit of cold cream, and it'll come right back to life for you. And you can see as it's thickening up, as it's heating up, you can see the thickness increasing. All good things. And now we're going to finish off. The beauty of this recipe is that, let's say you don't have cod, or you don't have lobster, or you don't have shrimp, you can use other things. If you wanted to use mussels, clams, you can make a seafood bisque with those items at the very end there instead. If you have tilapia instead of whatever it is that we have here, the cod or these items, you can use tilapia. And any fish that you are comfortable with is more than welcome in this soup. And this is a little bit of Tabasco, just to give it a little bit of a punch. And a very, very traditional method of finishing this soup is actually with some brandy or some sherry. And you just take a very small amount and you pour it there. If you want to show off with your guests, do it at the table. Take the bottle to the table, serve them their soup, and then at the very end, just hit it with a splash, let them stir it in, and you're set. After this, we'll get started on doing some plate ups with this soup. In the meantime, we'll turn our attention right back to our chicken and rice. And on the chicken and rice, again, I don't want everybody getting stuck on, well, we have chicken and rice and we have to follow this recipe. If you prefer to do chicken noodle, because your kids like noodles and you have noodles sitting around at home, you can do that as well. You can do it with penne pasta, or you can do mac and cheese if you're macaroni if your kids prefer the macaroni. And now that we've taken that chicken, we're gonna let that come back up to temp. We've allowed that cooking process to happen, and you can see some of those herbs are in there already, but we're gonna take those out now. We don't need to keep those. Once we let this come up to a boil, we're gonna, again, season this, salt, pepper, and we'll go ahead and get started on plating it up. All right, for our final soup to finish the day off, we're gonna make a traditional gazpacho soup. And I shouldn't say it is a traditional, because we're gonna mess with the recipe a little bit, and I'll give you some tips and tricks that you can use when you're at home making this recipe as well. So most important thing is tomatoes. And the tomatoes, we've actually gone through and taken the skin off of these to ensure that we don't get that little texture that you might find in tomatoes that still have the seed on them, okay? And in this case, we actually did do some jalapenos in this one to give it a little bit of a kick, so that's why it's not traditional. On the onions, we're gonna go with a little bit of onion as well. On these, it's up to you. If you're one of those people that doesn't like that raw onion flavor, then what I would suggest is saute it off a little bit so it takes out some of that flavor. Same thing would hold true on the garlic, either roasted garlic or sauteing it separately. So that way it can mellow down that flavor that would stay in your palate, stay on your palate for the entirety of the day, basically. Some fresh cucumbers in there. So this is great for summer soups. If you're gonna have guests over and you wanna have something that's easy, you make this the day before, leave it in your refrigerator overnight, and it allows all those flavors to meld together. Works out perfectly. So I'm gonna put a little bit of the tomato juice in there now, and that's just so that it helps us puree it down, okay? When we talk about traditional gazpacho soup, it does have bread in it, and that again is optional. So a lot of these soups give you that room to play with, okay? So I'm gonna start it on low, allow it to break down. Once it starts breaking down, I'm gonna kick it up nice and high. Hit it with a little bit more of our tomato juice. That's gonna give it that brighter color. Just a little bit of olive oil. All right, and I'm opting out of the bread, but yes, you can absolutely put your bread in here. All right, so the last thing that we want to do before we serve this to our guest, I'm not going to put that bread in there. Like I said, you could put it in there. What I'm going to do is actually use croutons to garnish this soup with. So I'm going to kick this on real quick, let that salt and pepper work together. Now that we've gotten that salt and pepper where we want it to, we will start our plate up. And on this plate up, what we're gonna do is we're gonna actually pour this into a carafe. We're gonna be very careful not to make a mess of it. And I always like to leave a little extra carafe side at the table for the guests. And this would be our actual plate up. Again, this is a chilled soup, so we're gonna serve it on some ice. Keep it nice and fresh. And we actually took some of everything that we incorporated in here. So we have bell pepper, we have jalapeno, we have onion, we have garlic. It's all in here like a little pico de gallo, if you will, without too much of a pico. And that's it. So I would serve this to my guests just like this, along with all the other soups.